the message behind the song is you go up to somebody and say, how are you doing? Basic message of the song. And what do people typically say? I'm fine. Never better. Or I'm getting along. But the question is, if people were to tell you the truth, and that's the name of the song, Truth Be Told. If people were to tell you the truth, what might they tell you?
But this doesn't exactly answer that question. But
Then don't answer the question. I'm not
but
answering.
you told us before to be thinking about what hit you in the song.
Yes,
And
okay.
the thing that hit me in the song, you said, is church more like going to a hospital?
Uh-huh.
And my thought of a hospital is the last place you want to go. And it's not one of those things you're comfortable and you want to do, but it's a last resort. And so that's what hit me when you said a hospital.
But it's a place where people need to go. Yeah. So if somebody were to say, hey, I'm fine, what do you think what are some of the situations, what are some of the things that are behind I'm fine? What do you think's going on in some people's lives? What are some of those things that cause people to want to give up?
Oh, okay, you changed it. No, I don't, that's not what I'm gonna
What were you
answer.
gonna say?
I was just gonna say, maybe they just don't want to burden somebody else with their problems.
Yeah,
Because
sometimes,
like you said, or somebody said their line, everybody has problems. So do I just want to put all my problems onto you?
one of our elders, and who shall remain nameless to protect the guilty. I've told some of you about this, but he came up to me one Sunday and he said, Dewey, how are you? Well, I thought he was serious. And so I proceeded to tell him how I was doing. And it had been a particularly rough week. And he stopped me and said, no, Dewey, wait a minute. You got to know a polite greeting whenever you know one. I said, oh, okay. In that case, I'm fine. And we've joked about that ever since. It's been funny. But yeah, sometimes there are folks that say, I don't want to bother you with this. I don't want to unload on you. I'm just going to hold it in. What are some of the things that are inside? What are people dealing with? What kind of trash? Let's give it a name. Okay. Yes.
Shame.
Shame.
Fear.
Loss.
Loss.
Work stress. School stress.
That health.
Insecurity.
Abuse. Grief.
Okay. Now it got you warmed up. Now those things are starting to flow out because the list is endless. And even as you mentioned things like loss, well, think of the different kinds of losses. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a good friend. It could be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of a dream, the loss of hope. You mentioned abuse. I mean, it could be the abuse that someone is heaping upon you, either physically, mentally, emotionally, or the way you abuse yourself. Substance abuse, your own mental torture of yourself at times. I don't mean to start this class off on a downer, but we need to understand these things are real. And whenever we're seeing each other in the hallway and say, hey, I'm fine, I'd encourage you to stop them just for a moment and say, okay, how are you really? Because there's a lot of folks out there that are ready to give up. And I would dare say every one of us in here have been in those spots. Whether now or in the past, definitely in the future. You know, Hallmark and American Greetings have made it quite a living by helping folks out that want to give up. I mean, they give all sorts of cards and other stationery that helps them figure out things, you know, don't give up, hang in there, you can do it, but way to go, and those kinds of things. But if you think about it, and you think about what it is that people need to hear in times of difficulties, in times of distress and disillusionment, discouragement, depression, in those times in their lives whenever things seem hopeless and whenever they're lonely. What is it that they need to hear? Encouragement? They didn't normalize it. This is something that we all have experienced. And it's okay to lean on one another in those experiences. I'm going to talk about 2 C's, and we'll refer back to them as we talk through tonight. One of them is it's what the book called the Mr. Rogers approach to disillusionment and discouragement and desperation. Well, what do you think the Mr. Rogers approach would be? Yeah. I mean, just look at him. He's got the sweater on. He just kind of looks like a big grandfather type. Just wants to wrap you up in a hug and see if he can't give you some word of comfort during those times. And those that are thinking about giving up, don't we need comfort sometimes? Don't we need somebody to come alongside and say, hey, I'm hurting with you. I'm right here beside you. God's here with you. God loves you. We need that comfort sometimes to be able to endure some of those difficult times that we have in our life. But you understand, well, let me bring up somebody else. Now, the book talked about William Wallace. Remember William Wallace? He's the blue-faced guy on Braveheart, if you saw that movie. But I decided I would bring in Winston Churchill. Now, what did Winston Churchill do during a time whenever England was going through a very difficult, discouraging, disillusioning time while Germany was bombing them day after day, night after night, and it looked like England was going to lose this war before it ever really got started? What did he give them?
He said, don't give up. We're not going to give up.
See, he had a much different approach. I mean, if he'd just come up and said, oh, now you're going to be all right here, I love you, what would happen? England would not have survived. Instead, he gave them courage. He came up and said, we're going to fight them on the beachheads, we're going to fight them in the fields, we're going to fight them in the cities, we're going to fight them in the streets, we're going to fight. He tried to infuse them with this encouragement, this courage that said, things are bad, things are looking hopeless, but we can do this. I mean, that's why encouragement has this little word in the middle of it. It is to infuse courage into somebody. And see, there are times whenever we get to those points where we feel like we want to give up. We just want to quit. We have reached the end of our rope. We have lost all hope. And instead of somebody coming up to us and saying, hey, let me see if I can't, make you feel better. What I really need to hear during those times is, hey, you need to get up and do something. Isn't that right? I was in band. If you were in a competitive sports team, if you were in a competitive music, like band or choir, if you were on a drama team, any kind of a team that goes and does any kind of competition. Whenever things are looking down, what does a good coach do with their team if it looks like that things are not going the team's way? A pep talk? What does that pep talk usually look like?
Well, you can do this. We're going to rally. We're going to come back. We're going to.
Yeah, see, what Winston Churchill would do And what a good coach would do is the suck it up buttercup speech. What do you mean you want to sit down and just give up? This game's not over with. This competition's not over with. Get up and let's give it everything you've got.
Sometimes we do.
Every once in a while.
Well, he's interesting. Nobody failed more than Winston Churchill. If you study, he had more fail. He failed at the military academy. He failed over and over and over and over again. And he ended up being that person. So he had a little experience of picking himself up by the bootstraps, if you will, and going forward.
He knew what it was to speak courage into a situation.
Well, he reminds me of that scripture in Romans 5:3-5, when it starts out the tribulation, and then it says, that'll produce perseverance, and then the perseverance will come along and you'll have proven character. And I looked that up because that struck me one day, proven character. That's when you go through something over and over again, and you still keep going. And the pep talk after that comes hope. And I thought, well, I have hope. So what's this deal that seems like this comes in order? Proven character is right before hope. And I was thinking, well, proven character. It just struck me that that's somebody that just never gives up. I'm good.
Now, the fact of the matter is, whenever we come to those times in our lives where we do become delusioned, we become discouraged, we become desperate, we lose hope, we need both messages. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, there's a lot of folks who might try to give us the comforting word, but we're a little shy about giving each other the encouragement word. It's not compassionate enough. It's not sympathetic enough. We don't want to hurt their feelings, make them feel bad. Instead of coming in there and says, you know, this is really tough, but you know, this is a time where you need to suck it up, buttercup. You need to do something about it. Well, the Bible regularly gives us both of these messages, doesn't it? It gives us messages of comfort whenever we need comfort. It also gives us that infusion of courage whenever we need it. And one of those places that over in Hebrews 12, verses 1-3. And this is the verse that we're really going to be anchoring in as we go through these next 5 weeks. So look at what this Hebrew writer is trying to give his folks a message of whenever they're going through a very disillusioning time. Now remember the background. The writer of Hebrews is writing to a group of Christians, probably Jewish Christians, who have been Christians for a number of years now. And through those years, you know, they probably, like a lot of us, entered into that Christian relationship, that relationship with God, with a lot of excitement, with a lot of enthusiasm, with a lot of hope, and a lot of that message. Jesus is coming back, but something has happened through the years. Jesus has not come back yet. There's not only have things not remained on that spiritual high for them, but they've actually been enduring some persecution because of their faith. Is this really what I signed up for? Is this really what being a follower of Jesus Christ is all about? They're disillusioned about what their faith means, about what that hope means. Many of them are thinking about going back to the old law because that's what they knew. That's what was comfortable. That's what, I don't know, in some way they thought gave them some hope. Where is the hope in Jesus Christ? And so the writer of Hebrews opens up in verse 12 and says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Now, as you listen to these words, are these words of a Mr. Rogers, or are these words of a Winston Churchill? These are words of courage. He's saying, guys, I know that you're going through a bad time right now. I know that you're disillusioned. I know that you are disappointed with what life in faith is bringing you right now. But guys, it is time to strengthen yourselves. It is time, he says, to throw off everything that hinders, everything that so easily entangles. It is time to continue running your race. It is too soon to give up. So let's look at these opening words to see what he has to say about, okay, what are those things that will help us in order to live a life of never giving up, of never giving in. And the first word that he uses is this word, therefore. Now, whenever you see the word therefore, here's your English test for the night. What does that tell you? So someone starts with therefore.
Something has been said before.
Something's been said before. There's something before it. Now, after all I've said on this, now we're going to move into this. Because this is true, this is true. Or because I've said this, this is what follows. Well, what has he talked about before? He has been talking about, in chapter 11, this great hall of faith. He talks about all these great men and women of faith and how they approached faith and what faith, the life of faith that they lived and how it affected them and what happened to them in those lives of faith. He says in Hebrews 11 and verse 1, now faith is being sure of what we hope for, being convinced of what we do not see. That language of courage, being convinced, being sure. Even there in those times whenever that hope seems hopeless, even there in those times whenever that strength seems hard to remember and hard to catch hold of, he says, we are sure of this. We are convinced of this. Kyle Idleman says, faith is a confidence that keeps believing all the pieces are going to somehow fit together, even when they don't have the big picture to work from. It's believing that God has a purpose, even when there seems to be no reason. See, I love Jimmy over here has this ministry, this even if ministry. And the even if ministry is based on this idea that even if things don't work out like I hope, even if things don't work out like I would dream, even if things don't work out like I would write the story, I'm still going to remain faithful. I'm still going to hang in there. I'm still going to go the course. And that's what the writer of Hebrews talks about. Notice the different men and women of faith that he mentions. How many of those men and women of faith that he mentions lived a stellar, all dreams fulfilled kind of life? In fact, what he says about them is they had the promises from God, but a bunch of them never had the promises in their lifetime. They lived their lives in faith in spite of the fact that they never got to see the end of their faith, at least not in this life. Therefore, he says, take some lessons from these folks. Find some courage because of what you read and what you listen and what you know about these men and women of faith. Any thoughts about the therefore? I know it's a little word. We can move on and maybe you'll have more thoughts about something here in a minute.
Therefore, these examples before. By faith, by faith, by faith, by faith.
You know what's amazing for me is you got all these individuals that he talks about, and as you go back, they don't have the wealth of stories of faith that I've got. And yet they hung in there with faith. I mean, I've got some examples to hang my faith on. They didn't have that.
Two things. One, Churchill was certainly a good example, but I would imagine, and I might be wrong, but most of us were also thinking about the current day example of the president of Ukraine and the way he's encouraged the people to not give up, to continue to fight. And then this passage in chapter 12, of course, is talking about all the way from when the people left Egypt and all of the trials and things. And yet they did not receive what was promised because they all died except the few who went into the promised land. But I think we can also extrapolate a little and not do damage to the scripture, in that there are so many that we have known in our lives who have gone on and are beyond that river now, that I like to think of them as part of that cloud of witnesses as well.
It's that next group that we're going to talk about. He says, we are surrounded by a great cloud. When you think about clouds, what imagery does it draw for you? Smoke?
White smoke.
It can be a storm.
Could be a storm. Yeah. But what about the smoke? What is it? I mean, what are the
More like
characteristics?
Big puffy clouds.
Okay. See these big puffy clouds up in the sky. We've seen a few of those here the last few weeks. Those have been kind of neat to see. What else you think of whenever he says surrounded by such a great cloud? Fog. It envelops you. And see, whenever the Greeks used the word cloud, they had both words in mind. They had in mind that big puffy cotton ball looking thing up in the sky that looks so far, so distant, so far away from us. But isn't it pretty? Isn't it nice? And it's kind of looking down on us. But it would also use the word cloud in the sense of a fog or a smoke or a mist that might envelop you. And in their writings, they would sometimes use the word cloud to describe a crowd of people. Now, you've got this great cloud that's around us. What's the imagery he's trying to get across?
That's covered,
Surrounded,
They're encouraging us.
not alone.
Yeah.
That's
Well, and
right.
I think of the Egyptians, whenever God was following them, by day he was following them with a cloud, by night it was a fire. So I think when I'm reading this, I keep thinking, well, God is surrounding them, watching over them. So the great cloud is God watching over us.
So his presence, God's presence is a part of this. Initially, whenever I read, all my life, whenever I've read this, I know later on he's going to talk about running this race. Getting rid of the things that hinder, getting rid of the things that entangle you so that you can leave yourself free to be able to run the race with courage and with strength. And so I've always had this vision of kind of like the Olympics, because they would have been familiar with the Olympics. And you got this big stadium, and you got all these people sitting in the stadium, and here's the runner, and he's down the track, or she's about to run her race. And you've got this crowd that is just cheering and screaming and saying, you can do this and go. In fact, if you've been in one of those competitive teams, doesn't it make a difference whenever you've got a crowd like that is cheering for you than if you're trying to do it in isolation? It may be in a job where you've got the feeling that your coworkers or that your boss has your back, as opposed to a job where they don't have your back. It could be where you go for a competition and you go on enemy territory, and the other team has all their fans there, but it was too far for my fans to get there. And so I don't hear anything but the boos and the cat calls, and there's a big difference, isn't there? And so part of the imagery may be this vision or this imagery of all of these witnesses filling the stands. And they're there to watch you run your race. And he's saying, remember, those folks are there to encourage you. But
Can it also be those that have gone before us?
yeah, all those that have gone before, that have gone with faith. But I'm beginning to maybe see this more as they're not sitting up in the stands. They're surrounding me and running the race with me.
Well, I was gonna just go back to that song in the very beginning. I was talking, it must have been years ago at this point, to a fellow, and he asked me, how are you? And the Spirit just said, tell him. I said, I'm not well, but by the grace of God, I'm healed. And that's all I said. And he remembers that to this day, on me walking beside him and encouraging him, because he knew a little bit about my health situation. And he thought that spoke wonders to him. So here I am walking by faith, and that one beside me, I'm part of that cloud. In that instance, he remembers that as encouragement. And who would have thought, that something that didn't feel so good to me would have been encouragement to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, you become a part of the cloud for him. But these are individuals, the ones in this cloud are the ones that have gone through the disillusionment, they've gone through the discouragement, they've gone through the disappointment, they've gone through the loneliness, they've gone through the trials of faith, and they've come out on the other side. And they are there to say, God can get you through this. I want to be careful, because I don't want this series, and I don't want you to misunderstand me when I say you can do this. You can't do it by yourself. It is always that understanding and that assumption that you are doing it with the strength and the presence of God in your life through faith. So get that underpinning, because that's what he's talking about. He's talking about these individuals who by faith met some very difficult challenges. He says, we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Hey, who's a witness? What makes up a witness?
Somebody who's seen something.
Somebody who sees something? You're going to say the same thing? Should beat you to it. I see
That's
that.
good comment.
Yes, it was. I see what
Great
she
minds
did.
think alike.
Yeah, it starts out the one who observes something. You see the illustration of, and we hear stories about how witnesses see a crime take place, and some don't respond and they allow it to happen. Others, they witness it and they're called to trial. And of course, they may have different stories to tell, but hey, they saw it. They witnessed it. Joe?
You've taken the group off of the screen right now, but I'm assuming that white image may be the sun. Maybe not, but where the scripture says, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. And all, so, and that group of figures that you had up there are 19, counting them, and one is white. So I'm assuming that might be the sun.
Oh, no, the one that's in the white, that's me.
Oh.
That's the point. That's me.
That's the
I'm
one surrounding. Well, I'm looking at it as a group surrounding us.
Yeah. No, that's us. That's you.
That's you. Okay.
That's me. Among those cloud of witnesses. Now, those witnesses, some of those are the ones they've observed. I've read the stories. I know what faith is. But when you think about these witnesses, and Jesus becomes the ultimate witness, doesn't he?
That's right.
Because he's the one that he'll finally come down to and say, you need to be patterning your life after his strength, after his courage. But understand, a witness is not just someone who observes. A witness is someone who experiences something, and then they can witness to it because they have been a part of it. These witnesses, this great cloud of witnesses, who are now a part of the heavenly hosts, are those that are now experiencing heavenly joy because they have gone through those trials, they've gone through those difficulties, and now they are in the joy and the bliss of heaven, and they can turn around and look and say, don't give up, it's worth it. How do I know? I've been there. I experienced it. These witnesses that he talks about are not just folks that have stood back and kind of watched life take place and say, oh yeah, you can do that because I've seen somebody else do it. their lives have been filled with these kind of experiences too. All these things we talked about up here, they are things that this cloud of witnesses, in some measure, have been a part of. And he says, notice what they did. Learn their lesson. Let them give you that courage to never give up. Well, what are they saying? As we listen to this cloud of witnesses. And for this, you kind of go back to chapter 11 and you kind of read through some of these different individuals. I'm going to mention 3 different sections of Hebrews 11 as we go through these things that they're saying. And those things that, what we're going to, in the next several weeks, we're going to try to get pretty practical about how to be infused with that courage, those lessons that they teach us. But they all kind of come down from these foundational things that they're saying. The first thing that they may be saying to us is, you need to keep believing. You need to keep believing. Hebrews chapter 11, notice what he says about Abraham in verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. How long from the time that Abraham received his call from God until the time that Isaac was born? You remember? A really long time. Good answer. A really long time. 25 years. He's called at 75 years old. He doesn't have this boy until he's 100 years old. Now, Abraham had a few dips along the way, didn't he? He didn't always live out in faith. But what the Hebrew writer says is his life is one that is of faith. And the fact that he had these bumps, these dips, these different things in the road that were not always smooth for him indicates he was going through some of the things that we've been talking about up here. How many times could Abraham had decided that that dream that he had given himself to was not real? That this promise that God said he was going to give, God either forgot about it, God decided he'd maybe give it to somebody else. After all, Abraham really messed it up with Hagar. Maybe he messed it up so bad that God decided, well, you can't have it anymore, Abraham. I'm going to have to move on to somebody else. Ever had those feelings? But for Abraham, in fact, Paul says this in the book of Romans. Righteousness was credited to Abraham. He was considered a righteous man, someone who was right with God, not because of how he was able to go through the dips and how he rose himself up and how he was able to carry himself on his own bootstraps. Like I said, he did it because he believed. He kept believing. He kept believing. He kept believing. What that says is this idea of believing is not something that is necessarily easy to do, is it? In fact, did you know that believing means taking a risk? In what way do you really take a risk if you're going to put your belief in something? Could be wrong. You ever been struck by that doubt? One of those things. We could add doubt up here, couldn't we? What if, in fact, Paul kind of mentioned that one time, that he mentioned a little bit different context. He says, what if we've given ourselves to this faith and it's really for nothing? What if Jesus didn't raise from the dead? then it would truly be for nothing. Everything that we've gone through would be for nothing. You ever had that doubt? What if I went through all this in my lifetime and it's really been for nothing? Abraham had to keep believing. See, in fact, everything involves risk. And the thing about believing with risk, some people in here, if I were to have a show of hands, and I'm not going to do this because, well, I just won't do it. If I were to ask you if you're a risk taker by heart, by nature, how many of you would raise your hands? Yeah, I'm a risk taker. No, not me. But you see, it's really those who risk by faith that open themselves up to a greater blessing, isn't it? Because they're putting their faith in something that they can't see that will be rewarded later on down the road. The person who doesn't want to risk it doesn't stay in that belief. And they miss out on any kind of blessing that might take place later. In fact, notice how the Hebrews 11 roster, it is a roster of men and women who are living life against all hope. There is nothing from a human standpoint that would have told them, you've got hope. From a human standpoint, these are folks that are risking it all, while other folks around them are saying, this hope that you put your hope in is really foolish. Why are you even putting your hope in it? In fact, remember Job's wife? What did Job's wife tell him whenever?
Curse God and die.
Curse God and die. Why are you holding on to this hope of yours? He was willing to risk it all because of his hope. That, from a human standpoint, was ridiculous. Having hope. We got this cloud of witnesses are telling us you got to keep believing. Kyle Idleman paraphrases what he thinks Abraham would tell us. If you're feeling disappointed and disillusioned, keep believing. If you're confused and wondering if you somehow missed God's plan, keep believing. If you've done things your own way and only made things worse, keep believing. There is a picture. You can't see it now, but up here in the cloud, we have an incredible view. The picture is worth fitting into, and it's coming together piece by piece. You're going to like it. Just keep believing. It's one of the things they would say is just keep believing.
Yeah. Well, I never thought this illness of mine would ever give anything good. But this one occasion, I was shipped off to this doctor in Phoenix. And he was asking me, he said, you've had this, at that point, it's 25, 26 years, something like that. He said, this is known as the suicide disease. How have you made it all these years without checking out? And I said, I don't. The strength doesn't come from me. And there was an opportunity I would never thought came up, but it did. And God can supply an increase in that. When I was there to do a purpose.
That leads to these next two. See, the second thing they would say is keep fighting. Keep believing and then keep fighting. Later on down in the story, as you go down to verse 24, he talks about Moses. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover, an application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. Now, Moses was not always a fighter, was he? In fact, did you know, when you're faced with these things and you're faced with the temptation to give up, there are three different reactions that you can have. One is you can flee. This is the same reactions that you have whenever you get afraid. Because that's basically when you want to give up, There's a fear that's involved here. And one reaction is just to flee. Get away from it as far as you can, as fast as you can. Maybe I can get as far away from this, this won't affect me anymore. I'm just gonna ignore it. I'm gonna turn my back on it. I'm gonna pretend it's not there. That way it doesn't exist. My parents told me that whenever I was a little boy, as a toddler, and I didn't want anybody coming up and talking to me or taking me, that I had this way of, as they would come up and try to talk to me and my mom was holding me, I would close my eyes and turn away. That way, either they were invisible or I was invisible, one of the two. And I didn't have to put up with whatever it is no. And isn't that the way we do with some of this stuff? We sometimes just close our eyes and we flee away from it. The problem with it is those people didn't go away. They just got worse. Not worse. They just tried harder. And unfortunately, when we try to flee from some of this stuff, it'll nag us and pursue us like crazy. And that's what Moses did at first. He fled off to Midian. He got as far away from Egypt as he possibly could. But the problems in Egypt did not leave him. The second option you got is to freeze. You can flee, you can freeze. You become immobilized. You become paralyzed by the stress, by the strain, by the feeling that you want to give up. So much so that you just don't know where to turn. You know what Moses did too? God says, I want you to go down to Egypt and I want you to talk to Pharaoh. Moses' response was, me? But I can't talk. He froze. But where Moses became successful is whenever he turned and with the strength of God, with the resources God gave him, he stood and he fought. Keep fighting. Keep fighting through it. That's what these great men and women of faith did. Even though things were looking bad, things were looking awful, they still kept fighting. They kept moving forward. See, moments of despair have this remarkable silver lining. Soren Kierkegaard, I say that right. Soren Kierkegaard. Thank you. He's some theologian from back there. He says, in those moments of despair, you're left with nothing to cling to, and you can only hope in something outside of yourself. You can discover God's power and presence in a way you've never experienced before. When we keep fighting, we suddenly come to understand, I don't have any strength to fight. Where is this strength coming from? Well, it's coming from believing in a God who is going to be with me and fight with me, fight by my side. His grace makes up for my weakness. In my weakness, I find his strength. So when it comes down to it, God doesn't want to leave us like we were before in the addiction or the abuse or the affair or the relationship or the financial devastation or the diagnosis or the failure. He wants to bless us and introduce us to a whole new world of meaning and opportunity. But sometimes we have to fight to get the blessing. Sometimes we can't just sit back and say, God, I'm waiting. Sometimes God is calling us into the fight so that we can receive the blessing. Think about Jacob. Jacob's mentioned in this Hall of Faith too. Remember, he's coming back from Laban and he's going back to the promised land. He's about to see his brother Esau. And there's somebody that shows up one night. Remember who it was? It's an angel of the Lord. And what did Jacob do with that angel of the Lord all night long? He wrestled. He fought him. Now, how ridiculous was that? To fight an angel. But Jacob had come to a point in his life where he was desperate. He was afraid that Esau might kill him. He was desperate. So he fought. Third thing they might say to us is keep perspective. Keep perspective. In difficult situations and painful circumstances, we're tempted to see only our immediate hurt, or we're tempted to only see the immensity of the moment, of the time right here. You think about these folks down at the end of chapter 11. I mean, these are some unnamed cloud, this unnamed cloud of witnesses. He says, I don't, verse 32, I don't have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flame, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised again to life. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. I mean, he goes through this long, long list. How in the world does a person go through the things that he's talking about here? Well, the only way to do it is to keep a bigger perspective than what you got in the here and in the now. In fact, you may like to do puzzles. A couple over here, another over here. Lori got, my wife got Angela into doing a puzzle whenever she was still living at the house with us. And it was, you know, it's kind of like one of those pictures where the little boy draws the picture of the white bunny in the snowstorm. Well, that's basically what this puzzle was. It was some white owls in a snowy scene. And they finally, boy,
I haven't recovered from that.
She has PTSD from that.
no, there was still a lot of tears. And, oh, that was awful. Well, I've got a puzzle here. It's got 1,000 pieces in it. Anybody interested in putting the puzzle together?
Should be nice to have a picture.
Oh, yeah. You don't have the picture to go by, do you? Now, some of us, we might sit down, we say, oh yeah, I like doing this puzzle. So you start putting these pieces together, trying to start putting together. How long would it take though, without the picture there to really be able to kind of stay with it? Long time? Some of us may just open up this bag. Well, okay, let's go find one that has the picture. In fact, I was talking to somebody today and says, oh yeah. She said, my roommate, she says she has to take each and every piece and she puts it up against the picture and tries to find it. And then she talks to herself as she's trying to figure out where that goes. But see, life is a lot like this. Because we're given this puzzle with all these pieces, but we're not given a picture to figure out what it's supposed to look like whenever we get it all put together. But we start putting the pieces one by one. And we've got some options. See, the only way that I would be able to get through this puzzle is by believing there really is a picture that finally is going to come all together. I mean, there really is one in there. I don't know what it is yet, but one of these days, that final piece is going to be put in that spot, and I'm going to get this figured out. I don't know how long, but it's coming. And you know, during those really difficult times, now see, with the puzzle, I saw some fighting going on with those white owls in that snowstorm. If you don't have the picture, you really got to stay fighting with this thing. I am going to get, there's got to be some perseverance. There's got to be some stick-to-itiveness. I have got to get through this. Or I can decide I'm going to give it up and I'll never see what the picture is. I'm never going to see what the end result is. See, that's the real problem with giving up, with quitting, is what I risk. See, that's the bigger risk, is I risk not seeing the finished picture. And the only way I can do that is I keep perspective. But there's really something bigger here than what I can see right now. And that's why I stick with the puzzle. That's why I stick in some of this. That's why I hang tough in some of this. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about some of those things that try to keep us from staying the course. Some of those things that try to prevent us from finishing the puzzle. And what we do about it. What are some things we can do to get past those things that want to prevent us from doing the puzzle? and then come down to finding out the strength that Jesus has for us, because after all, he didn't just tell us to do it, he showed us how to do it, how to keep with it. Let's pray. Father, you are a great and awesome God, and we thank you for your love and your mercy. And we're thankful that you have left us this great cloud of witnesses that don't just tell us about it, but they actually lived it and they demonstrated it. Father, I want to pray for the people in here who are going through a really difficult time where the real temptation right now is to give up, to quit. Father, not only comfort them, we do pray for comfort, but infuse them with courage. And let us, as your people, encourage one another, to fill each other with courage. As Paul said, to bear with one another through those very difficult times. Allow us to have the vulnerability and the willingness to open ourselves up so that others can give us that courage. Father, I'm so thankful that what's in this life and the struggles in this life is not all there is, that there is something greater coming. There is a promise that you're fulfilling. There is a bigger picture that you're putting together. Father, help us to believe that. Help us to fight for that. Help us to keep that perspective in our lives. Through Jesus, who showed us how to do it to begin with, we pray. Amen.
Good.